So today I have the pleasure of introducing to you a very old friend of mine, actually my lab partner in 9th grade biology. So the speaker you're going to be hearing today, his name is Szabo. Ross is the Wellness Director for the Geffen Academy at UCLA, the CEO of the Human Power Project, which is a company that creates cutting-edge mental health curriculum. He is also an award-winning speaker. So Ross was the director of the National Mental Health Awareness Campaign for 8 years. In that time, he spoke to over 1 million people. He created the first mental health speakers bureau in the country and reached millions in appearances, and also wrote a book called Behind Happy Faces. After 8 years on the road, Ross got a little burned out, so he did what anybody else would do, and he joined the Peace Corps. So Ross served in Botswana for 2 years. When he came home, he decided to start his own company and create a mental health curriculum for people of all ages. His first curriculum, also titled Behind Happy Faces, is being used by over 200,000 students across the world. He's a social pioneer who has led the youth mental health movement, a blogger for the Huffington Post, a former mall model, and he knows how to track lions by watching the movements of other animals. Today, he's here to talk to you about mental health. Get ready to laugh and change. Please welcome Mr. Ross Szabo.
All right. How's everybody doing this morning? Are you excited for a mental health presentation? All right. That's good. All right, so the biggest challenge I have whenever I stand up in front of an audience and say, I'm going to talk to you about mental health, is all of you have different ideas of what that actually means. So like if you Google image mental health, these are the images that come up. So you have some celebrity breakdowns, you have some YouTube stars, you have some more serious things like school shootings, people looking angry, sad, lonely, scared. The biggest problem I have is that when all of you see these images, very few of you are like, oh, I really want to have mental health. I want to be like these people I see on this screen. And that is one of the challenges we have. That when most people hear the words mental health, they immediately think of someone who has a problem. They immediately think of a diagnosis or a disorder or suicide or depression or something that's happening. But the actual definition of mental health is not having a problem. The actual definition of mental health is how you address those challenges in your lives. So mental health isn't having an issue. It's not being stressed out. It's not having lack of sleep. How many of you don't sleep? Okay? It's not having anxiety or depression or any of these things. Mental health is how you actually address that stuff. It's how you handle stress, how you get more sleep, how you communicate, how you take care of yourselves. So I always want to stress this definition from the beginning of this presentation. Your mental health is as important as your physical health. If you want to work on your physical health, you exercise, you take care of your body, you eat right. If you want to work on your mental health, you have to think about how you communicate, how you cope, how you can build your brain. So a lot of people look at me and they wonder, okay, but why is this guy the spokesperson for mental health? Very few people, when they first see me, think like, ooh, I don't trust this guy. He doesn't look right. He looks like he's had a lot of problems. Doesn't look like he's okay. And so one of the things I'm going to talk to you about today is a very intense personal story with mental health issues. This is a content warning. We are going to talk about deeper stuff. So I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 16. When I was 17 and was a senior in high school, I was hospitalized for attempting to take my own life. I was in the hospital for a while, got out of the hospital, went back to high school, graduated, went to American University for 2 months, had a major relapse with bipolar disorder, had to go home. And then I battled extreme substance abuse and was in and out of psychiatric wards and other hospitals for the next 4 years before I was able to return to American University and graduate. The goal of me sharing my personal story with you this morning is not to scare you. I would never want any in this room to be like, man, that guy's life sucked. Guess I'll go eat lunch. Like, that's not why we're here. The goal of my personal story is to help you think about the decisions and the choices that you're making in your lives. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you a big overview of mental health, why it's important. I'm going to talk to you about my personal story. I'm going to talk to you about coping skills, and we're going to do all of that in 30 minutes. So let's start with some statistics. The statistics around this issue are pretty overwhelming. 20% of high school students have a diagnosable mental health disorder. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for high school students. 76% of students report feeling overwhelmed. 11% report getting a good night's sleep. I could go on with statistics for a while, but here's what I'm sick of. Since you have been in middle school, people have been telling you how messed up you are. You have heard that you have anxiety and depression, that you don't sleep, that you're stressed out, that you could be bullied, that you could take your own life, but no one tells you what to do about it. Most of the awareness campaigns in this country are focused on just those statistics. It would be the equivalent of me sitting all of you in this room and being like, here's the deal, everybody. You all have cancer and heart problems and diabetes, and you're all going to die. And then you were like, oh my gosh, what can I do about it? I'd be like, I don't know. Talk to a doctor. I was just here to tell you you're going to die. Then I'm out, right? It's not working. We need to move past telling you how messed up you are and start teaching you actual skills of how to take care of your minds. And start teaching you the same skills that you know of how to exercise and eat right and look at your family history to take care of your body. We need to do that with mental health. There is one statistic that is really relevant, and it's the reason I started speaking, and that is that 66% of young people don't seek help for their mental health. They won't talk to a friend, a family member, a parent, anyone. So I was hoping some of you could raise your hands and tell me, why is it that all of you in this room know someone who's dealing with some kind of mental health challenge, but 66% of people still won't talk about it? What are some reasons we don't talk about this issue? Yeah, in the back.
Well, one of the most common reasons that I hear about from long-term members is nobody's going to understand.
Okay, no one's going to understand. What else? Yeah.
It's an immense vulnerability to show that part of yourself to someone else other than I am. Well, I don't know how to deal with what I'm dealing with. I get over my head.
Yeah.
No matter what you're dealing with. So particularly we have more subjects that have mental health.
Yeah, it's hard to be vulnerable. Yeah.
You could be a burden to someone.
You worried about being a burden to someone in the very back? Okay, yeah. What's that? Fear the response? Okay, so it could be consequences, yeah? Yeah, so you may not want to accept it, yeah? So it could be a sign of weakness. Why don't you suck it up? Why don't you deal with it on your own, yeah? Social stigma, so embarrassment, judgment, stereotypes, yeah. Disappointment? It's not accessible. The help's not accessible. Yeah. The biggest answer I didn't hear was trust. How many of you in this room have told somebody something and been like, please don't tell anyone this, and then they told everyone this, and then you're like, I'm just not going to trust anyone again? Yeah. So the reason we have to start with this question is because this is step A of understanding mental health. A lot of times people think step A is treatment or diagnosis. I had access to really good treatment and a diagnosis when I was 16. And I wasn't willing to accept help because I felt weak and stupid and embarrassed and ashamed, and I thought my problems should just go away on their own. And when they didn't, I didn't know what to do. If you really want to change mental health in your friendships, in your school, in your families, you have to ask this question and then break down those barriers and talk about it. But how we talk about it is really important. And as I travel around the country, I find that most people don't even have a vocabulary for their mental health. So like if I ask people, how is your mental health? They'll be like, it's good, it's bad, it's fine. But those aren't words you use with like your physical health. You can describe your physical health. So the first thing we have to do is break mental health into different categories. There are different categories for these challenges. So there's everyday challenges, things all of you go through. Environmental factors, the home you grew up in, the school you went to, the way you're raised. Significant events, experiences with loss, change, or rejection that impact your life. Mental health disorders, and developmental disabilities. The reason we need different categories is because what's currently happening is people who have some stress will tell you they have an anxiety disorder. And there's a huge difference between having stress and anxiety disorder. People who go through a breakup will tell you they have clinical depression. Huge difference between feeling depressed and having clinical depression. We need these categories to better understand how to take care of ourselves. And then what we really need to change is the way that we view mental health. So the current way we view mental health is on like a spectrum. And the way we view that spectrum is, on one side you have people who are sane, and then in the middle you have people with like moderate mental health disorders, and then on the F side you have people with severe mental health disorders. This spectrum sucks. And it sucks for a couple of reasons. One, you can have bipolar disorder and be sane at the same time. So if you're on two places on the spectrum, it's not working. And then the real reason it's difficult is it's promoting that you should only seek help if you're on this side. And if you're on this side, you're okay. It's limiting. So we need to change the mental health spectrum to actually incorporate all of us. And think about how you balance your lives. So there's different places on this spectrum. Somebody who's able to balance doesn't often have to think about their mental health. doesn't have a lot of stress, doesn't have a lot of triggers, hasn't been through any loss, just mental health doesn't occur to them. These are the people I hate most in life, but they exist, so they get a place on the spectrum. Difficulty balancing would be like, I'm having trouble, I'm just not actively working on my mental health. Needing help to balance could be somebody in treatment, but it could also just be someone whose parents got divorced, whose friend passed away, whose dog died, who went through a breakup, who stopped talking to them, and they're like, you know what I need to do is I need some help. I need to exercise every day, I need to do yoga, I need to listen to music, I need to play music, I need to volunteer, I need something to help me balance every day. Needing constant assistance to balance could be somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous or somebody who needs like an outpatient program. And then being unable to balance could be someone who's suicidal. But it could also just be someone who also went through something so traumatic that no matter what they try on every other part of the spectrum, they're not able to balance. A lot of you in this room may have already been in that place. When my dad passed away, I went from someone who always needs help to balance to not being able to balance in seconds. And no matter what I tried for months, I was not able to balance. Not being able to balance doesn't have anything to do with functionality. I went to school every day, I taught every day, I was in a master's program, I still had my marriage, but no matter what I tried, I couldn't balance. This is a mental health spectrum. All of you are on this spectrum, your place on this spectrum will change sometimes in minutes, but it's really important to frame your mental health this way instead of this way. And it's really important because you have a lot of big issues affecting you today. One of the biggest issues is what I like to call a competition to see who can be more stressed out. So let me see if this sounds familiar. One person says to another person, hey, I didn't sleep last night. I have a test I have to take and a paper I have to write, and I'm not going to sleep tonight because my life is hard. And the other person, instead of being like, sucks for you, is like, no, I have 2 tests. I have 3 papers. I play 6 instruments and 4 sports. I volunteer in 16 organizations. I actually just got a job to help feed my family because my life is harder than your life. If you are having a competition to see who can be more stressed out, please know this is a competition. No one actually wins. Because the winner of this competition is the most stressed out, burned out person you know. Like, you don't win a car. You don't win ice cream. You win by being like, now I can't even play on my phone because I'm so dead. It would be much more useful to have a competition to see who can sleep more than to see who can burn out. Who can handle stress better than to be like, I'm so stressed. No, I'm stressed out. No, I'm stressed out. It'd be like, no, I'm good. I'm okay. Because there's a huge difference between good stress and bad stress. Good stress is a motivating factor. Activates your fight or flight mechanism, helps you accomplish things. Good stress helps you get things done. It motivates you. Bad stress is the opposite. It's debilitating. It's headaches, it's body aches, it's insomnia, it's moodiness, it's all kinds of things no one wants. The issue is, when I say just the word stress to all of you in this room, how many of you immediately think of good stress? And how many of you immediately think of bad stress? And that's the problem. There's a really amazing TED Talk called How to Make Stress Your Friend. If you can start utilizing good stress in a more proactive way, where you reframe what's stressing you out, where you take power in a situation, where you stop catastrophizing, it can make a huge difference. What this really leads to is the biggest mental health issue affecting high school students today, which is lack of sleep. I have a great saying up here, you don't have insomnia, you have a messed up sleeping pattern. I have 2 pictures of people asleep, and then a baby asleep on a pug. Why? Because it's adorable. Before I talk to you about why sleep is important, I want to ask you some quick questions about how much you sleep. And I want you to think about how much you sleep on your average school night. I don't want you to think about how much you sleep when you get a break. Because I know when a lot of you get a break, you binge sleep. You'd be like, yeah, I slept for 16 hours. I woke up once to eat. I went back to sleep. On your average school night, how many of you would say you get 8 hours of sleep? 7 hours, 6 hours, 5 hours, 4 or less. All right, so this amazing thing happens. No matter what audience I do this with, when I'm at 8 and 7 hours, no one ever looks around the room. When I go to 6 hours and lower, people start looking around the room, and I never know if someone's looking around the room to be like, who sleeps less than me? Because I will stay up the rest of this year. I will beat this person at this no sleep thing. Here's the most important thing you need to know. Neuroscientists have found that the most effective way to break a human being down is to only allow them to sleep for 3 to 5 hours a day. The average student in this country sleeps 4 to 6 hours a day. When militaries around the world capture prisoners of war and want to interrogate them, they don't keep them awake like on the movies. They only let them sleep 3 to 5 hours a day, which is right in line with how much students are sleeping today. So congratulations. I'm not sure what you win. I'm just sharing that with you. And why do I bring it up? I don't bring it up because I have all the answers. I bring up these issues because when I stood on this stage this morning and said I was going to talk to you about mental health, a lot of you were like, I don't need this, I'm pretty okay. If you're having a competition to see who's more stressed out, if you're not sleeping, mental health is for you. And the biggest reason mental health is for you is because the human brain doesn't fully mature until age 25. I have a picture up here of the brain as a computer. The brain is the most advanced computer we have any knowledge of. We can't build a computer that does 1/10 of what the human brain does. The issue is before age 25, your brain doesn't look like this fully connected computer. It looks more like this. It's wiring itself. It's forming connections. It's forming habits. It's forming views of yourself, your internal self-talk, and coping skills. Mental health is not something you do just when you have a problem. Mental health is not something you try just when something's wrong. Your mental health is something that you have to wire and foster and grow, much like your physical health. So to talk to you about how that plays out, I'm going to share with you more about my personal story. I have a really interesting beginning to my personal story. I live in Los Angeles now. I didn't grow up in LA. I grew up in Pennsylvania. Not interesting. What is interesting is I was actually born in Bethlehem and raised in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. If you're not familiar with my home state, an hour north of Philadelphia are two towns, Bethlehem and Nazareth. The deal is if you live in Nazareth and you're pregnant, there's no hospital. The only hospital for you is in Bethlehem. You have to go there, have your child, flee back to, I'm not sure how my mom got home. Maybe she fled. I'm not sure. I put this up there for perspective. I used to not have Google Maps, and someone would always be offended and be like, hey, I loved your presentation, but that's not like a funny joke. You're not mental health Jesus. And I never said that. I never hashtagged that. These places actually exist. An hour south of these places on one road, you can drive through Intercourse, Pennsylvania, Middlesex, Pennsylvania, Virginville, Pennsylvania, and next to Virginville is Blue Ball, Pennsylvania. So now you're all looking at me, and you're like, I thought this was a mental health presentation. This is where my mental health issues started. I would like to blame the people who named these towns. So, any story about mental health starts with a photo of your family. This is a really sweet photo of my family, probably mid-1980s. You will notice a couple things. My parents thought like, hey, we're having a family photo. We should wear matching track jumpsuits. My mom has just let her hair out of a disco perm. She carried the disco era a little too long. I have two older brothers. My oldest brother, Thad, is 7 years older than me. My middle brother is 2.5 years older than me. I am the baby in yellow being held by my dad. All of you have a family photo. With the rise of phones, it may not be as unstaged as this, where like the dog saw the camera, my brother didn't, it's fine. But all of you have this picture. What this picture could never tell you about my family is some really important things. So as you look at this photo, you would never know that my dad was raised by an alcoholic father. A 1950s classic alcoholic father. That my dad was never hugged. That he was never told he was loved, that he never had a birthday party, a friend visit, that he was often beaten much like his mom, his brother, and his sister. And as you look at this photo, you can never know that my mom grew up in a home with an alcoholic mother who had bipolar disorder. And that sometimes my mom came home to a really amazing place with baking and music, and sometimes my mom came home to an extremely dark place. So when these two people got together, much like your parents did, they decided they were going to make some changes. My father, who was never touched or had love expressed to him in his entire adult life, had 3 boys and decided he would hug us every day. He would tell us he loved us every day. And that we would have a childhood filled with birthday parties and presents that he didn't have. My mom, who grew up in an extremely unstable home, decided our home would be stable. And she would work hard to make sure we had the childhood she didn't have. But the one thing that neither of these people could change is that on both sides of our family, we have bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety disorders, and addiction. So no matter what my parents did, they couldn't change that. And so I had a pretty great childhood. Camping trips. I used to go to the Chesapeake Bay every summer, go to the beach, go do all kinds of fun things, play sports, hang out with my brothers. But my life changed drastically when I turned 11. This is me rocking a Jordan t-shirt. They had traded Barkley by this point, so I gave up on the Sixers. And this is my oldest brother, and this is my middle brother. What we are doing in this photo is dropping my oldest brother off for his sophomore year at the University of Pennsylvania. My oldest brother is really book smart. Like, he graduated high school when he was 16 and went to the University of Pennsylvania to major in physics at 16. He got through his freshman year. Everything was great. We dropped him off for his sophomore year in August. This is that photo. In October of that year, my dad got a call from the University of Pennsylvania hospital that said, your son has been determined to be a threat to himself and others. We're hospitalizing him against his own will. We hope you can come down to visit him. My brother has bipolar disorder. He hadn't slept for about 6 days. He was walking around campus trying to teach classes, singing loudly in stairwells in the middle of the night. So the counseling center assessed him and put him in the psychiatric ward. So at age 11, I visited my oldest brother in a psychiatric ward in October. In January, a couple months later, my grandmother died. About 10 months after that, my best friend was killed. And about 3 months after that, my grandfather died. So from the ages of 11 to 12, this little guy went through a lot of loss, a lot of change. And so what I started doing at age 11 and 12 was I learned that I wasn't really great about talking about life or death. I wasn't much of a comfort at these hospitals, but I could make people laugh. And so between the ages of 11 and 12, my coping mechanism became, I'm going to make everyone laugh. I'm going to put on that happy face. I'm going to cheer everyone up, but I'm never going to share my own emotions. I'm never going to talk about how scared I am, how hurt I am, how much I want these people back. I'm just going to make people laugh. And then around age 13, I started drinking. Not all the time, maybe like twice or 2 or 3 times a month. It was rural Pennsylvania. We had access to alcohol. And these became my coping skills. Well before anything else happened, I was just trying to get through my day, and that's how I started expressing myself. So by the time I got to 10th grade, it's okay to laugh at this photo? Oh, sorry, 9th grade. Who thought this guy would have trouble adjusting to high school? Maybe a lot of people. So I put that picture up there for perspective, but what I started going through in 10th grade wasn't funny. In 10th grade, I started having classic symptoms of bipolar disorder. So it started off with me not sleeping for like 4 days in a row, but I wasn't tired. I'd lay down to go to sleep, my mind would race, I'd think 8 to 9 thoughts a minute, and I just couldn't sleep. And after not sleeping for like 4 or 5 days in a row, I felt invincible. Felt like I could do anything. Felt like I was unstoppable, felt like I was on top of the world. Then my moods would change. I'd get really angry. I'd get really violent. I'd punch things, kick things. Then my moods would change again. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't do anything. Because my mind was going through so much, I just wanted to shut it down. Well, the quickest way for me to shut my mind down was to drink. But I never drank to hang out with people. When I was 16, I would drink a case of beer and pass out, or a bottle of vodka or a bottle of rum and pass out. When I was in high school, we had presentations like this. Somebody would always come in and be like, hey, everybody, don't drink alcohol. It's bad for you. Okay, cool, I knew that. But no one ever came into my school and said, don't drink alcohol because you hate yourself. Don't drink alcohol because you don't know how to deal with what you're going through. Don't drink alcohol as your only way of coping. Luckily, my middle brother saw everything that was happening to me. He told a friend of the family. Friend of the family took me for a walk and was like, I think you need to seek help. So at 16, I sat down, answered all these questions for an hour and a half, and they diagnosed me with bipolar disorder. At 16, I thought, cool, it's got a name, you'll give me some treatment, and I'll be good to go. That's not how it works. And the most dangerous thing that happened before that diagnosis was that I learned to drink alcohol before I learned to talk about my feelings. So as I went through my junior year, and I went into my senior year, that's what I did. I hid my feelings, and I drank. And when I went into my senior year of high school, I went into a really deep state of depression. Now there's a huge difference between feeling depressed and having depression. When you feel depressed or upset or sad, those are things that have an identifiable cause. So let's say your parents get divorced. Let's say somebody dies, your pet dies, somebody stops being your friend, you go through rejection. You can feel depressed or upset or sad. Those things have an identifiable cause. The opposite of feeling depressed or upset or sad is happiness. You can come out of that. When you have depression, you don't have an identifiable cause. Everything sucks, everything hurts, and you don't know why. You stop doing things you enjoy, you stop taking care of yourself. You may have thoughts of death, you may have thoughts of suicide, but those symptoms last for weeks or months at a time. A very famous author, Andrew Solomon, says the opposite of depression isn't happiness, it's actually vitality. It's having the energy to get out of bed. And this is what I went through in my senior year of high school. So in September of my senior year, it started off with me just feeling lonely. I felt like there was no one to talk to, no one would understand me, but even if there was someone to talk to, I thought I should suck it up. I should deal with it on my own. If I couldn't, I must be weak. And I truly, at 17 years old, believed I'll wake up and this loneliness will just go away. But it didn't. In November of my senior year, I started having thoughts of death and suicide, and that built to the point where I was thinking about suicide and death 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But again, I didn't talk about it. For 2 months of my senior year, I did what I always did. I went to school. I put on my happy face. I made everyone laugh. I made everyone smile. And then I went home, and I either cried myself to sleep, or I didn't sleep at all. Because I honestly believed one day I would just wake up, and I would want to live again. And I didn't need to tell anyone. And I didn't need to say anything. But unfortunately for me, that day never came. And on January 5th of my senior year, I was hospitalized for attempting to take my own life. And nothing happened that day. I went to school like I always did. Had a basketball game that night, played in the game, we won the game. I went to a restaurant with my friends to celebrate, like we always did. And on the way home from that restaurant, I decided I no longer wanted to live. Now what's really scary about that is that I didn't want to die. And so people always ask me, why would you try and kill yourself if you didn't want to die? I didn't want to die. I just couldn't handle living the way I was living anymore. I couldn't handle living thinking about death and suicide and all these things, and I thought it was the only way out. It's not. So I came home from that restaurant, I was rushed to the hospital, tempted to take my own life, and when I got to the hospital, they gave me a tranquilizer. So that tranquilizer knocked me out for like 24 hours. And I woke up the next day, and I had no drawstrings in my sweatshirt, no shoelaces in my shoes, no sheets on my bed, and someone watching me 24 hours a day. And a couple days after that, we had group therapy, and everyone in that hospital had to stand up and talk about why they were there. And the stories before mine were really traumatic. And then they came to me and they were like, why are you here? And I didn't know what to say. I was 17. I never could have imagined being in a psychiatric ward. They said, if you don't know why you're here, can you at least tell us about your life? And I was like, oh yeah, I can do that. My name's Ross. I was president of my class. I played varsity basketball for a couple years. I was a member of SAD and peer helper. I volunteered 5 years to the Special Olympics. I attended the National Youth Leadership Forum in Washington, D.C. I had a 3.6 GPA, and I stopped. And I felt really stupid. Because the life I was ascribing was my external life. It was my college resume. It was the life that everyone else saw, but it wasn't the life that I lived. If I wanted to talk about the life that I lived, I should have stood up and said, hi, my name's Ross, and I hate myself. And I hate myself so much I'm willing to binge drink and drive, and I don't think anyone should care about me. And I didn't say that. And the point of this part of my story is not actually about me at all. It's about all of you. Because how many people do you know who have an external life that everybody sees and an internal life that's completely different? A lot of us do that. A lot of us put up fronts and defense mechanisms to make everyone think everything's okay when inside it's not. That's natural. But if your external life is so far apart from your internal life, you need to find a way to express it to someone in some way to let that out, because it will explode. So I was in this hospital for a couple weeks. Eventually I got out. I went back to high school. When I went back to high school, all of a sudden things were different. Before I went to this hospital, I was a cool guy. I was a guy people liked, people knew. When I got out of the hospital, all of a sudden people started calling me a psycho, a crazy kid. Started spreading rumors about me in the small town we grew up in. I lost friends. People made fun of me. And so 2 months after I got out of the hospital, a psychologist came into one of my classrooms to talk about the patients he treated. And as he talked about the patients he treated, every single student in that classroom started laughing, except me, because I was tired of being laughed at. And so I grabbed my teacher and I took him into the hall and I said, hey, this isn't funny to me. And he looked down at me and he said, okay, what do you want to do about it? And I said, let me speak. Let me tell people what it's like to actually go through this. He said I could speak. So 2 weeks later, I stood up in the exact same classroom and I spoke for the very first time. And it did not go as smoothly as this. I sweated through my clothes. I stood behind a podium. I shook. But when I finished my presentation, nobody laughed. And I learned at a really young age that if you share your story, it opens other people to sharing their stories. So in April of that year, my college acceptance letters came in, and all I wanted to do was get as far away from Nazareth, Pennsylvania as possible. I chose to go to American University. 2 months into my freshman year, had a major relapse with bipolar disorder. I went home, was hospitalized again, got out of the hospital, didn't think I had a future, took a year off from college, went to a local college in my house for 3 semesters, took another year off. 4 years after my original freshman year, I returned to American University. And on the outside, I'm doing great. School tours, internships. On the inside, I'm more of a mess than when I was 18 because I never changed my coping mechanisms. And at 22, my tolerance was higher than it ever had been. So in November of that first semester back, one night I drank so much that I passed out for 22 hours. And that used to happen to me a lot. I'd pass out for 10 hours, 12 hours, 22 was the most. I woke up that night, I looked in the mirror and I started crying and I said to myself, all right, you're either going to continue this and you're going to die or you're going to have to change. That night at age 22 was the very first night that I ever accepted having any problems, which is really sad. Because I went through all that loss from 11 to 12. I was diagnosed at 16. I was hospitalized at 17, 18, and 19. It wasn't until I was 22 where I was like, this is real. But acceptance doesn't work when you hate yourself. People always think you need diagnosis and treatment, and those things are important, but they don't matter when you hate yourself. And the first thing I had to learn to do was actually learn to like myself. And once I learned to like myself, only then could I deal with my mental health disorders. So I had to get treatment. I had to get therapy. But the biggest lesson I learned in all of my recovery was that I never chose to have bipolar disorder, but I could choose to change the way that I cope with it. I could stop hiding. I could stop binge drinking. And so I did. I started developing new coping skills of talking to my friends, my family, my therapist. I started exercising. I started eating right. I started taking care of my mental health. That allowed me to graduate from American University and go into the fancy career you heard about in my introduction. I have to work on my mental health every day, and that's okay. The one thing that bonds all of us in this room together is that none of you are ever going to choose to go through anything difficult. None of you are ever going to choose to go through loss or change or rejection or have a disorder, but you can choose to change the way you cope with it. So I always like to take the last couple minutes of the presentation to talk about coping, because you cope every single day. You cope with your friends, you cope with your family, you cope with school. The concept I want to introduce you to is that this is a synapse in your brain. This synapse sends messages. The more often a message is sent, the more automatic your reactions become. So if you look at the world's top athletes, these are people who have done something over and over and over again to the point where they no longer have to think about it. When Serena Williams is on a court, she doesn't think about it. It's an automatic reaction. I started binge drinking when I was 16, and I binge drank until I was 22. It became a coping mechanism. The longer you use a coping mechanism, the more automatic it becomes, the harder it is to change it. So whatever you cope with, by distancing yourself, by zoning out, whatever it is, that's becoming automatic. That's hard to change. And your coping mechanisms start at a really young age. And much like me, they develop well before you thought about what a coping mechanism is. And as you get into your teenage years, your coping mechanisms can get a little more dangerous. So if you want to change them, there are steps. Step 1 is you have to want to. Step 2 is you have to be able to identify it. Step 3 is you have to replace that ineffective coping mechanism. Step 4 is you have to practice it until you become the Serena Williams of that coping mechanism. And step 5 is having an environment that allows you to change. Your brain is going to be built throughout the rest of your life. And I want to share one more part of my personal story that I think speaks to that. When I turned 21 years old, my parents took me out for a birthday dinner. Pretty standard dinner. We sat down, we ordered appetizers, waiter walked away, and then my parents started crying. And that was not standard. And so I looked at my dad and I was like, hey, why are you guys crying? And my dad looked back at me through those like choked up, kind of bawling breaths, and he said, "We didn't think you would live to be 21. I gave my parents a lot of reasons to not think I would live to be 21, but I did. I can't tell you how many hands I have held, how many people I've hugged, how many tears I've seen from friends and family members who had someone who didn't live to be 21. My own cousin died of an opiate overdose at 23. My point is, all of you in this room, you have one life. You have one chance, and this is it. And most of us spend our days going through a checklist of things we have to do until we get to our own place of comfort and our own place of peace. And your place of comfort could be another person. It could be your room. It could be your phone. It could be a song. The next time you're in your place of comfort, I want you to think about your internal life. And I want you to think about how you can express it more. Because it takes more strength to talk about these issues than it does to hide them. It takes more strength to talk about these issues than it does to bury them. All of you in this room have the power to change your mental health. It's time for you to embrace that power. So this morning, I share with you my personal story, but what I really hope happens is at some point in your life when you need to, at some point in your life when you really need people to hear you the most, all of you in this room will share your story. Because you never know where your story will lead until you tell it. Thank you very much.